Hey Jeff, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Brandon. Super excited to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on today on episode 224 of the podcast. A lot I want to dive into, a lot I want to talk about in terms of investment strategy, allocation, things like that, and the crypto space and in the world we live in today. Before we do and jump into all these questions, tell me a little bit more about yourself. I'm sure people are going to be curious. What's your story? What's your background? How did you find your way into this crazy, wonderful world?
Yeah, so I originally, went through traditional education, got my finance degree at a SEC school, and then ended up graduating. And right after that, worked for the largest bank in the United States in asset management, and I got licensed, and I was going to be a financial advisor. And I just realized that that type of a career path didn't really align with my values. And also, I always have loved unconventional alternative assets specifically. And I had been following Bitcoin. My first experience with Bitcoin was in 2013. Sold it later that year. It was just a hot topic in college when I was in a fraternity. And then I kind of just checked up on it every like 6 to 12 months, started talking about like financial advisors about it, and they were always like obviously against it in 2015, 2016. And then in 2017, when I saw the whole world or the world of crypto, specifically all these other cryptocurrencies like Cardano and Ripple, and then we had Bitcoin Cash and all these different blockchains coming out, cryptocurrencies coming out, and then I saw the price go parabolic. I knew that there was likely a really, really important industry ahead of us. And I used that time to do a ton of research, and obviously I was actively investing. And then when I left my corporate job, I ended up starting our first hedge fund in on April 30th of 2019. So now I actually have an education company that educates about blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and specifically about asset allocation. We don't go into huge technicals of how blockchain works, and I talk about it, but it's overall like investment strategy within the cryptocurrency space. And then on the fund side, yeah, we have multiple funds for accredited investors, and we have investors worldwide. So heavily evolved in the space, both as a professional, and it's just honestly something I naturally gravitate towards because it's such a really, really cool industry.
Nice. What was that experience like in college around Bitcoin and it being popular?
Yeah, the biggest thing was if you guys are unfamiliar with crypto, it was primarily, obviously it came out after 2008, so Bitcoin really began in 2009, and that was after the great financial crisis in '08. And then what it was primarily used, and I think it had a huge deal and a reason for why it actually gained traction, was all the black markets that it was being used on. So I was in a fraternity, we were idiots, and that was my first like opener to what even Bitcoin was. And then from there, I'm like, wait, this is not just like a internet money. This is something that is likely really impactful once I started to understand how the blockchain actually worked, and all the reading the white paper and understanding fundamentally what this thing even was. And then in 2017, realized it was going to be likely a really, really big deal. So I guess to start, probably wasn't the most professional way to get in the space. But to be honest, if you were back in the space in 2013 and 2012, you're likely had some type of knowledge about how it was primarily being used back then. So yeah, everything that has been an interesting time has always molded into something really, really positive for me.
Yeah, it was my experience was very similar in college as well. It was all on Silk Road,
Yeah.
where black market stuff. People were using Bitcoin for that, and then I think pornography and gambling, online gambling, those two also helped quite a bit. But there's so many similarities between the early internet and Bitcoin, where a lot of those similar things are what helped build the internet in a lot of
Yep.
funny ways. Also helped kind of build Bitcoin, but in the origins, even though they're the same, Bitcoin's definitely seen tremendous growth since then. Was there any particular moment in time where you were like, okay, this is the real deal. This is, a space I need to be in, or I need to learn more about it myself?
Yeah, it was specifically in 2017 when I started to look into like I see the hard fork, and now that's Litecoin, and then we see
Mhm.
Bitcoin Cash, and then I'm like, wait, what is this Ripple thing? And I think everyone that was involved in 17 probably bought Tron as well. And then I'm like
Yeah.
starting to try to understand, what even a blockchain is, and because before that in 13 and 14, I'm just like, this is just a currency. I don't know if there's like I didn't understand if there's like a true company behind it. I didn't do my research into it because I wasn't taking it very, very seriously. And then in 17, when I saw, from the previous all-time high, it was 1,100 to almost 20 grand. That entire time, once it was over about 5K, I'm like, okay, this is probably something. This is now worth thousands of dollars, and I was buying it for 130 bucks like not too long ago, and now it's in the news, and like major financial institutions are speaking about it. So I just had a feeling, and once again, I always just naturally gravitate towards things that are different. I just hate being average,
Mhm.
normal. I don't like traditional things. I love modern things. I love just alternatives in general. So I think it was just a perfect fit for me to start to understand like, wow, this is completely aligns with my values. It's likely a disruptive technology, and I don't really see it going anywhere. So, and then I started to understand too how like globalization is happening before our eyes, and how and then I think the most impactful thing too was it's cool to see how it's working in the US, right? It's definitely needed. We've got inflation, but once you start to understand what's happening in developing countries, it is uh, absolutely necessary for them to have something like this. This is a decentralized currency that's a hedge against inflation, because it's really sad. If you look at like countries like Zimbabwe, where they have to wheelbarrow money to go buy a loaf of bread, and
Mhm.
their stock market's up 300% a year, but actually they didn't make any money because the currency got deflated even more than that, or inflated even more than that. It's really sad. So once I started to understand, like outside of our U.S. bubble, how important this is globally, I'm like, okay, this is going to be a really, really big deal.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point too on developing countries. The issues they face with the inflation and the dollar getting stronger at the same time, and all these currency swaps and IMF loans and all the things that happen with the dollar that's like crushing other countries and their currencies. Like Colombia, for example, or the peso here is getting crushed because of the dollar getting stronger versus it, amongst other things. But there's bright spots where places like El Salvador, for example, have made a huge gamble, but it's paid off for them tremendously in a number of different ways. From a macro perspective, what do you think about a move like that? Making Bitcoin legal tender in a country. I know Brazil has been considering it. I think Chile is considering it now. Either Chile or Peru. I know there's a lot of countries out there across the world that are considering it. It's such a gutsy move, but in some ways it does make sense. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, that's Mexico is considering it too. I think that's the next largest one. And I don't know if you saw in Rio de Janeiro now, if they pay with Bitcoin, their tax, they get a discount on their tax.
Hmm.
So it is quickly happening. And also, I think over the past about 60 days, we had a bill introduced in Arizona and Colorado, and I believe there's one other state in the U.S. to try to make it legal tender.
Hmm.
So that's an extremely interesting dynamic. I don't think the federal government's going to agree with that one. So you're likely still going to have to pay capital gains tax, but obviously that's for a professional tax advisor to answer for
Hmm.
you. But I would say that I still see it as prior to understanding the Lightning Network, I think it would be nearly impossible. Now that the Lightning Network is actually in working order, and you see how I don't know if you've looked at the charts on the adoption of it, but
Hmm.
it's
Oh, it's
absolutely,
huge.
oh
It's
yeah, it's
huge compared to
exponential.
where it used to be.
Yeah, it's going parabolic, and more people in El Salvador have Bitcoin wallets than they do bank accounts. So I think that, yeah, long term, and I'm saying, when I say long term, I think it could be generally accepted as a currency potentially in like 10 years. I don't see it happening that much sooner, especially in like a country like the United States. I think it's going to take it's that they're not going to want to give up the global reserve currency and start using an asset and losing tax on it now. But I think it's really important for this test to play out and see how it works in El Salvador. My personal opinion, I think it is going to work. I think that's going to be a very extremely interesting experiment because it is so volatile. And, people are right when they say like, it's just at 69K. It's at like what, 40 something, right below 40 today. So it's like, it is difficult to go, you go to a coffee shop and at least as long as you're denominating things like and using your US dollar mind and your fiat mind, things can be more or less expensive and dramatically within, a day or so. So I think that once more long-term capital flows into it, I think we're in a perfect spot because right now it's being used as really like an inflation hedge, a store of value asset, more of like a longer term digital asset where you're just buying property in cyberspace. That's awesome. Well, that's what I think needs to be the transition. That needs to have global adoption so that more capital flows into it. It becomes less volatile, and then it can be properly used as a currency. So I think there's kind of a sequence of events that need to play out for it to be successful. And I think we're already seeing it. The last year and a half has been astronomical for the fundamentals of Bitcoin. So I think it's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of capital that flowed into Bitcoin and crypto generally in 2021 and from institutions too. Where do you think the capital's coming from now this year? Has that changed at all or has it gone up in your professional opinion from when you look at it and you look at the charts and the statistics?
Yeah. I mean, primarily it's still retail driven. I mean, I think the last stat that I had was probably about 9 months ago. And since then, there's been like KPMG and some really respectable public companies that have put it on their balance sheet as well since then. But I believe it was like 6 to 7% of the money was like institutional. So it was still very, very heavily retail. What we also have seen, and I know that you are very knowledgeable on this aspect, is like the hash rate has gone way up, and now we're starting to see real adoption with like true institutions and public companies like putting investments, whether they're just buying the security behind the actual company that's mining, or they're actually implementing their own mining facility and operation. And you see that reflected in the hash rate. I checked last night, and it was in February this month. It went up to like 250 million terahash per second, which is the highest it's ever been. So I think that's gonna like a really interesting business model that a lot of companies are gonna want to be looking into because they can use the land and the equipment to
Hmm.
depreciate. They've got a physical asset. They've got the income, all of those things. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. And I mean, we're already seeing the public companies and really respectable people completely flip their opinion on Bitcoin and crypto once they took the time to even understand what it is. So I think we're about I actually tweeted something last night that I know that it's a really weird time with like the stock market starting to turn over and the geopolitical wars and all this stuff. But I actually think this is the perfect setup for Bitcoin because if it has I do believe there's going to be emotional sell off. We're going to have a nice dip. I don't know when that's going to happen, but that's just my personal opinion. And I think that's going to be like the greatest and potentially last opportunity that we have to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible before we
Hmm.
see just exponential adoption.
Yeah, just to touch on mining, I've done so much of it in the past, and I was one of those people that got in really early and did it. I was doing it with GPUs, building computers out from scratch when it was, actually plausible to do so. Now it's nearly impossible with where hash rates are at, and a lot of things like Ethereum, for example, have been moved away from proof of work, and the industry is just not what it used to be, and you have to have massive mining farms. But the hash rate has always been an interesting thing for me with Bitcoin because the mining is so key and such a huge aspect to making Bitcoin work and what makes it, what it is today. If there's no incentive for those miners to stay online, it kills the network. So whenever you see the hash rate go to all-time highs or start escalating and going up, usually there's a good correlation with the price of Bitcoin eventually going up to justify the smaller reward payouts. And vice versa, when it goes down, it usually becomes a lot easier, and usually you see a pullback in Bitcoin, and we saw that in the fall too.
Yeah.
After Bitcoin hit its all-time high and then pulled all the way back down to where it's between 36 and 39.
Yeah.
Now you're seeing hash rates spike again and interest picking up. I wouldn't be surprised if there's another run up sometime in the next 6 months.
Hmm.
I think it's a huge key metric a lot of people overlook because it's still, even though it's like no one wants to talk about proof of work anymore, For Bitcoin, it's standard. Like that's never going to change. So you have to
No.
factor it into the tokenomics.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, one of the things that we look at is the hash ribbons, just on a like more technical standpoint, and that flashed. It doesn't happen very often, but it flashed a buy signal in the summer after the big sell off, and then we saw it go up 130% in the next few months. So yeah, I mean it's been and also it had an impact from China banning it as well. That's why the hash rate
Hmm.
went way down, and now it's picked way up, and now a lot of it's moved here in the U.S., which I think is really powerful for the U.S. to have more of the total computing power of the Bitcoin network in house here. So yeah,
Yeah, I think a lot of that went to Texas, right?
oh yeah, there's a ton in Texas. Yep.
What's keeping all this stuff in mind, what's your guys' investment strategy like? How do you go about looking at when to, put down capital into or pull capital out of Bitcoin, or do you guys hold long term, or what's the overall plan like?
Yeah, so we have multiple strategies within the fund. Primarily, we like to be more value type investors. So we primarily only invest into coins that have their own blockchains. And what we like to do is we usually keep our Bitcoin exposure like between 30 and 60% of the fund. And we will actively manage a portion of that Bitcoin against some of the top layer one protocols. So we'll trade the volatility between Bitcoin and Luna, Bitcoin ETH, Bitcoin Sol. And that's where primarily our alpha comes from, and why we've had success at outperforming Bitcoin is because we're using the volatility in these larger cap altcoins that we still fundamentally believe in, that have more volatility to trade against Bitcoin. Because oftentimes, like we see this like seesaw effect happen where Bitcoin will rise in price, the alts lag about 1 to 2 weeks, and that's just a huge opportunity for to take advantage of that volatility swing. So yeah, we primarily hold like 10 to 15 assets in the fund. We do a lot of research behind the scenes just on the blockchain, just looking at activity and spikes in the number of active wallets and transactions and all of those things, and then obviously understanding the team that's behind the project, because although a lot of these blockchains, and a lot of them actually are not decentralized, but they're at least working towards it. You still got to bet on the people, because they got to make changes and to the code and to the community, and they got to do a lot of things that are really important for the project at early stages. And there's not really any project I would consider that's not in early stages right now, besides Bitcoin, that it's finally over a decade old. But yeah, so we're more of like value based investors that bet on the data behind what's going on in the blockchain, betting on the teams, betting on the token metrics, all of those things in combination, and then actively managing Bitcoin against the top layer one coins.
Yeah, when you think about it, thinking about how early or how young some of these projects are, Ethereum is in that category too. It's not even 10 years old yet. It's
No.
kind of crazy when you think about it, despite everything that's kind of happened with it in the last, I don't know, 7, 8 years of its existence.
Yeah, and exactly case in point, like you mentioned earlier, this is exactly what I'm talking about. They're moving it from proof of work to proof of stake. That is a dramatic change, and they're
Hmm.
also scaling the chain so that it goes from 12 transactions a second to 100,000 transactions per second. So like, there's little upgrades and stuff that you got to be betting on the proper people behind it, because if you're not, then you're likely the coin is likely not going to succeed long term.
Yeah, it's been a long-standing argument because they've been taking so long to make this change to proof of stake, and they can't seem to come to consensus within the foundation on what to do most of the time. Do you think Ethereum is going to, get to that point where it's going to be the chain everyone wants to use and it's going to solve all these problems and be cheaper and faster? Or do you think that the competition with all these other blockchains out there are so good that, that market share is never going to be the same that it used to have?
Yeah, I mean, just from an asset allocation standpoint, because of the uncertainty behind the changes, we did decrease our ETH exposure throughout 2021, just because we're rolling into 2022 where they're actually going to roll out these massive changes. And typically, when you're making a big changes like this, it's never a simple rollout that's completely unflawed.
Hmm.
So we did decrease our exposure there, and we still hold a fair amount of ETH, but our thesis is that we do think that a lot of these other chains have the ability to outperform, and the reason is because they have better tech as it stands right now. And then also, there's just like no one wants to go mint new NFTs on Ethereum because it's $70 a transaction. It's been upwards of like $500 at one time. It's pretty insane. So it's just super expensive. It's not scalable right now, and that's why we did decrease a little bit and just move into like other chains that are much quicker that do, like I mentioned, Bitcoin does like 4 transactions per second, ETH is 12, Cardano 250, but then you've got like Solana at 65,000, Luna at 10,000, AVAX at 10,000, Cosmos at 10,000. You've got Harmony upwards of 100,000. So it's like there's more scalable and less expensive options. But so in the short term, and Ethereum already has a market cap of like 300, 400 billion dollars. So you could, invest into a coin that has 1/10 of the size of that, and it's even more scalable, and the adoption rates are going up. And we like to look at total value locked. That's another thing that we like to like. One of the metrics is total value locked compared to its relative market cap. And we believe that's an important metric to kind of gauge interest and adoption of that chain and overall ecosystem. So, but the thing is, ETH has so much of a first mover advantage. It's not even funny. They've got like an unbelievable amount of other dApps built on top of their chain that I think it will take some time if they get like leapfrogged. I think if they roll out this ETH 2.0, it'll be still a long-term successful project. I bet more on it being successful than not being successful. So I am bullish on ETH over a longer period of time. And but my personal opinion is like I think everything is going to be interoperable. I don't think there's going to be like one chain that's the only chain that people use. I think all these chains are going to end up working together. Not sure what your opinion is on that, or if you're a huge ETH bull, but would love to hear what your thoughts as well.
Well, my biggest investment I've ever made was in Ethereum, so my heart's there a little bit, but at the same time, being completely pragmatic, I'm not one of those one chain to rule them all kind of people. I don't really live by that dogma. So there are people that think Bitcoin can adopt all these different changes and just eliminate all the chains out there, and you can just start building things on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I don't think it's practical. In a decentralized world, if that's where we're starting to head, at least in some degree, why can't we have a decentralized number of blockchains for? I really think there's going to be a number of them for different sectors and different industries, like Ethereum, Solana, and Cosmos maybe is for one kind of sector primarily, and then one set of blockchains are for gaming and others for supply chain. And I think they'll just end up getting really specialized. And depending on what industry you're in, you'll probably consider using certain blockchains over others, maybe based on fees, transaction speed. Maybe they'll have other perks or benefits. Maybe some will be more interoperable than others. It's just too early to tell.
Yeah.
There's really no way. Everyone was getting so hot on things like Solana, then Solana had all these outages and had network downtime, and then people wanted to keep using Ethereum, but it's so expensive and you can't sell anything unless you sell it for like $170 because that's where the fees start at this point. And then there's a number of other blockchains that are just not as popular, so people are afraid to use them. It's just too early. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, I think, because we all think, I don't know, in the crypto world, it moves so slow. It feels like I've been in it for like 20, 30 years. But the reality is Ethereum's been around for 7 or 8. Everything in this crypto space has legitimately been around for about 4, maybe. We've had an ecosystem for 3 or 4 years, and Bitcoin's the oldest thing we have.
Yeah.
That's only 11 or 12 years old. And it's the best performing asset of the last decade. Hands down. It's not even close.
Yeah.
So I'm nothing but bullish on the whole space, but it's hard to predict anything long term. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, especially with like people trying to mold Bitcoin to do a zillion different things. I think it just needs to do one thing, which is be a store of value asset. And if it moves into a currency, that's awesome too, because there's so much other opportunity for these. Like I call these other like altcoins like programmable money. Pretty much is like there's so many things that can happen with them, and it is super hard to predict. I think that you're right. There's going to be niches in certain sectors and industries that use certain chains. And then I think like at some point, I think it's going to become so widely spread that, a typical, retail and consumer that's doing whatever they want to do, whether they're playing a game, they're going and buying a coffee at a coffee shop, they probably won't even know what chain that they're using, but they'll have an idea of like what coin they're using because it can be bridged to like an infinite number of chains in the future. So yeah, it'll be really, really cool to see how the space grows. And I would say that I think it's good that we are early stage, because if we weren't early stage, this is what people don't understand is there's no alpha in things that already have a ton of capital in them. So when you see a lot of volatility and you're freaking out because the prices are high and then they're low and then they're high and you don't know if you should buy and sell, it's like, well, that is an opportunity for alpha, which is a higher rate of return because there's not enough capital. It's still speculative. It's new. Once it gets to be older, it grows up. There's a ton more capital. The returns are not going to be even close to where they are today, and we're already starting to see them diminish. But they're still obviously pretty extremely high relative to other asset classes. So I'm super excited to see how the space grows.
Yeah, me too. One more question. What do you think about the investment potential in meme coins? And I can't even believe I'm asking that question, but it's such an interesting thing to think about now. Everything from Dogecoin to Shiba to whatever else is under that crazy umbrella. Some of that stuff seems to be actually normalizing and becoming actual payment methods, becoming actual collectibles, or they're producing NFTs on those blockchains, and their communities are so big and so large, and have such a, I don't know how to say, but when they decide to do something, they all do it. Like they have such a strong wave effect. It's crazy. It's a lot of this has started from the whole GameStop and Reddit and Robinhood debacle a year ago, but what are your thoughts on it? Is it investable? Is it smart to invest in it, or is it still really kind of dangerous, more of a gamble?
I think it's still pretty more. It leans on the side of a gamble for sure. I think that memes are really powerful. It's obvious that they are. I mean, since 2020, they've been really, really important to specific assets, like you mentioned, like AMC and GameStop, and we saw Doge and Sheeb and multiple other meme coins erupt. But I think that's also kind of a topping signal for the market, to be honest, when like things that no one has any idea why it's valuable are worth $30 billion. That's I think, in my opinion, a little bit of a sign that the market has been completely emotional, and it's likely overheated, and maybe we just threw too much money into the overall economy. So I think long term, yeah, memes can be really, really important. Personally, though, I want to know the data and the utility behind it. If I don't understand the fundamentals and the utility, I'm just not a buyer. And I could be completely, I could miss a lot of opportunity because of that. I'm not saying that the way that I do it is the only right way, but like it's the same thing with me. Like I don't bet on a lot of gaming coins. I don't buy a ton of NFTs. I bought a Bored Ape because I thought it's cool and it looks cool. But like I haven't spent a ton of my own personal investment money into NFTs because I don't collect things. I didn't never like baseball cards. I don't play video games, so why am I going to take huge positions in gaming coins? I just like to invest in what like I understand and believe in, and then that helps you. I think that's a really important point to make. Is like if you understand what you're investing in fundamentally, you're much less likely to make emotional decisions when there's a lot of volatility because you have that conviction that comes from your previous knowledge and time that you've spent to understand that asset. So I think it is going to play a super important role in society. But me personally, I'm not. I own 0 meme coins right now.
Right, gotcha. It for something that's so emotionally driven. I don't think there's any way to really measure it. I've tried myself. I can't. I really can't.
Yeah.
But it's fun to watch.
Yeah,
For sure.
definitely, definitely. Very fun.
Anyways, where can people go to learn more about what you guys are doing with Boron? Maybe they want to invest with you guys. Maybe they want to learn. You guys said you did educational stuff too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like we have an inner circle. I manage like like a 50K portfolio on just like how I obviously deem fit, and a lot of people find value in just like seeing like how overall like my thought process behind like certain swings in the market and what assets I'm holding and stuff. So like yeah, people will just follow like my journey with that 50K portfolio, and that's been really cool. We've got over 1,000 people in there for some time now. So it's called like an inner circle. I'm sure we'll drop a link below or something for that.
Sure.
And then yeah, if you are a accredited investor and you do want exposure to cryptocurrency, and you don't want to spend all the time that it takes to worry about the regulation and allocation and the 20,000 coins and all the nonsense that goes on along with it. If you just text crypto to 877-771-0615, we would be happy to help.
Perfect. Do you guys have like a community or place people can go to like chit chat about, trading and investing, like a Discord or a Telegram, or no?
Yeah, as of right now, all of our stuff we do, absolutely. We have multiple Discords, and then we have a Telegram as well. All those are like for our private communities, though. I generally talk about a lot of things publicly, and that was another thing I'd mention is if you guys just want to see what I'm up to and stuff, I share a lot about my life and what I do in my professional life on social media, just at Jeff Sekinger on like YouTube and Instagram and Twitter. So, but yeah, all of our communities are private, like Discords and Telegram channels.
Perfect. Guys, be sure to go follow Jeff and Boron. Check out what they're doing more. If you follow him, if you guys want to learn more about investing, you want to learn more about what's going on in the space, and hear from him and his thoughts, learn about his processes and his strategies. Also go down below and like the video and subscribe, and stay tuned for next week, next episode of the podcast. Or actually, I have one later today too. Anyways, Jeff, thank you for taking the time to call on the show. Really appreciate it. Learned a lot. Fun conversation too.
Yeah, appreciate it, Brandon. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.